This video is going to showcase exactly how you can master preflop using GTO Genesis. We'll practice an opening range, 3-betting range, and a response to a 3-bet so you can see exactly how to train each spot as efficiently as possible. First, let's take a look at the button's opening range. If this is a topic that you're already very familiar with, you can skip to the next section of the video where I go over 3-betting ranges. We just want to take a couple seconds to outline the bottom portions of the button's opening range so we can go practice in trainer afterwards. We can see that the button opens offsuit aces down to ace-3 offsuit, any offsuit 9 or better, opens any suited king, queen, or ace, suited jacks down to jack-4 suited, any suited hand with a 6 kicker or better, most of the suited connectors, and 7-5 suited. On top of that, there's a couple of hands that are mixing, like Jack-8 offsuit, 10-8 offsuit, and King-7 offsuit. Now, let's head on over to the trainer and input the settings that we want to maximize our training. First, we just want to input the general settings. Preflop, we want to practice our opening. We'll do 10 hands just for this video, but you can set it to as many as you want, and we'll say that we're on the button. First, we get a hand. Very fitting hand. Obviously just a clear fold, so we'll fold. We get some advice. It would have been minus 0.21 EV if we had opened, and obviously folding is the correct play, which we're taking at 100% frequency. We can also open the trainer settings on the left and customize some more outputs. So if we don't want to see hands like 7-2 offsuit, we can put remove obvious folds onto standard or aggressive. I like to just do standard. And as for hand pace, I'm going to keep it on manual, but if you wanted, you could switch it to instant and automatically get dealt hands much faster, so you could cycle through as many hands as you wanted in a very quick time frame. You can say fold, best, and then automatically gives you your next hand. For RNG, if you like doing randomization, you can put the RNG on, and you can also get an animation speed. I personally put it to none because I want to go as quickly as possible, and these are the settings that I usually use for myself. So back to the trainer, I'll raise this hand, correct, and I think we just got dealt the same hand. That's kind of crazy. And you just cycle through this until you feel comfortable with knowing the entire range. I like to use the hotkeys as well, so I can cycle through the hands faster. On top of that, it shows you what frequency you're supposed to be taking if you have any hands that are mixes. And then after you finish doing 10 hands, you get a summary at the end. I was locked in, I went 10 for 10. And you can continue session or analyze any hands that you had some problems with. After completing your opening training, you can go back and test out your 3-betting. So we'll end our session, head on over to study, and let's say that we want to practice the small blind 3-betting range facing a button open. First thing we want to do is actually take a look at the hands that are 3-betting, just so we have a general idea. I typically simplify to playing a 3-bet or fold strategy, so any of the hands that are mixing call and 3-bet, I'll just 3-bet in practice. We can see that any pocket pair down to 7s is 3-betting, with 6s doing it occasionally, along with some of the other lower suited connectors. You can 3-bet any suited Broadway, and most of the offsuit Broadways except Queen-Jack offsuit, which is very infrequent, and then suited Ace-X down to A7 suited, and then a few of the lower suited Ace-X. On top of that, you can 3-bet Ace-10 offsuit at some frequency, and hands like King-9 suited and 10-9 suited. So just outlining that, we can go on over to the trainer, input ourselves as the small blind and the villain as a button. Say we want to do 10 hands again, and then say that we're facing an open. So we're only going to be 3-betting or folding. Jack-9 suited, I think this is one of the hands that we can do at some frequency, and you can see that we do it 9.5% of the time. Typically it says we're folding, but it shows that there's no EV difference between the two options. 2s, just a fold. And I would typically do this until I felt comfortable with the range, whether that be 50 hands or 100 hands. I would just do it until I felt like I really had the range down properly. You can also go and customize any of the other settings that you'd like. If you wanted to go to aggressive, so you would get even less folds, and you can just basically cycle through hands that you'd be 3-betting way more often in practice. On top of that, you can go and turn on the sound effects if you like the sounds of the dealing. And we were locked in. We got 2 goods, which means there was 0 EV loss. It was just a lower frequency action. And I would typically do this until I got 95% accuracy with a larger sample size, say 50 or 100 hands, and then move on to the next range that I felt like I needed to practice. So for this last one, I'm just going to end session, back to study, And now I'm going to look at the button's 4-betting response to the small blind 3-bet. We can see that the button is 4-betting a polar range, which means they're only 4-betting the strongest of hands and some polar bluffs. So hands like ace queen suited, ace jack suited, and king queen suited are all put into the calling range, whereas hands that are weaker like ace 5 suited and some of the lower suited ace x are put into the 4-betting range. So we see that typically still aces and kings and ace king suited are always 4-betting, along with ace king offsuit queens that are typically 4-betting, and then some of the offsuit ace x, some of the worst suited broadways, and then some of the pocket pairs at a low frequency. So we can head on over to the trainer and then input ourselves as a button again with the villain as a small blind and say that we're facing a 3-bet, 10 hands. And now if we wanted to actually pull up the range ourselves, we can head on over here and say show strategy and see that our hand is typically folding and running the 4-bet at a lower frequency. You can keep this pulled up while you're playing if you want a reference, or you can go back and look at this at the end after your session to see how close you were to making any of the decisions. If you were doing this as a post-flop trainer, you could also go to study spot and then look at the node and see how off you were in terms of EV and what the proper hands to run your strategy with are. I would typically have this on automatic so I get a dealt a new hand every time, but I'm going to leave this on manual just so you can see that it shows the 4-betting option, the calling option, and the difference in EV between making the correct decision or the incorrect decision. I think I'm going to remove all these folds back down to standard. I would typically do this for 10-15 minutes before a session just to make sure that I'm in the right headspace and I get some reps in before actually going to play. I find that this is very helpful, especially for post-flop, so I'll be making another video showing a post-flop demo of this and how I use it slightly differently than the pre-flop one. We got a high accuracy, no blunders or mistakes, so I would typically move on to the next range that I wanted to practice, and then continuously do this until I felt comfortable with all the ranges that I needed to learn. I would also make sure to look over any repeated mistakes I had throughout my sessions to correct any easily fixable mistakes I was doing repetitively while in my training session. Now, just to talk a little bit more about an actually defined process for the most effective pre-flop studying. Studying with these methods will allow you to master pre-flop training so you can know exactly what to do in every spot with full confidence. And then, on top of that, you can build exploits based on the different players you're playing against to maximize your EV, basing all your decisions from a strong GTO baseline. The first thing that I'd recommend doing that I covered in this video is quickly reviewing the range. Focus on the bottom of the range, the main hand classes, and any mixed decisions. For example, looking at the button's opening range and deciding where the cutoff points are for different hand classes. Don't spend a ton of time actually looking at the chart. You'll learn much faster from practicing and seeing which part of the range you struggle with after looking at your session results. Next, you should train one exact spot until you feel comfortable with that entire range, or for a predetermined amount of hands, such as 50 reps. Don't combine it with several positions or configurations in the same session. Isolating one spot makes it much easier to memorize, and on top of that, you can recognize your mistakes and understand which part of the range you need to work on. When looking over your results, don't only focus on the individual hands you missed. Instead, look for some patterns in your mistakes. Consider whether you're opening too lightly, calling too widely, missing 3-bets, missing 4-bets, or just taking a certain action with the wrong hand class. Identifying the category behind a mistake is much more useful than simply memorizing one incorrect answer. If you made several similar mistakes, briefly review the section of the range and immediately complete another set. Doing the second set right away helps you reinforce connections while they're still fresh in your mind. After you feel comfortable with the range and your practice in one day, you should come back to it the next day while looking at the range first. Doing well immediately after reviewing a chart mainly tests your short-term memory. Doing well again the next day is a much better sign that you're actually learning a spot. I would recommend practicing a range until you have it at around 95% accuracy or better over a larger sample size. This doesn't mean you need to perfectly reproduce every mixed hand frequency. The goal is to make accurate decisions and determine which hands are at the cutoff points for different parts of your range, so you can take either action in practice depending on your opponent. This makes the most off of your opponent and helps you adjust to different player types. When it comes to studying, I would suggest setting aside a focused 15 to 30 minute block to study one area of your pre-flop game. Start by choosing a specific range, reviewing it briefly, and then completing a set amount of reps in the trainer. If you're happy with your score and feel comfortable with the range, move on to another spot. If not, review it again and complete another set. Continue moving from one range to the next until you've used up all of your time block. You can use this process to easily memorize every opening, calling, 3-betting, and 4-betting range covered throughout this pre-flop series. GTO Genesis is linked in the description. Check it out to master your pre-flop ranges and help support the channel. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.